All right guys, I'm so excited. Not only am I gonna show you how to do another vase, but we're gonna take this vase, pour it, and we're gonna also create a finish for this table. So just to let you know, the last video that we did, I donated one vase to a local fundraiser, and that vase sold for $300. So it goes to show thrifty can equal dollars. This particular table was a thrift store find, so I wasn't really sure what kind of finish it had on it. So just to be safe, I washed the top with TSP or any kind of cleaner that will take off dirt, grime, and grease. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is after we clean it, I'll come back, I'll sand it, I'll paint it our base color, and then we'll go to the next step, which is pour our epoxy. So I wanna be able to talk to you guys in this video about taking your furniture, what to look for, what kind of furniture do you want to put your time and effort in to redo. You wanna make sure that you've got good bones with your piece, that there's not a lot of repair that needs to happen, but you also wanna make sure that everything that you're gonna be pouring the epoxy over has got good adhesion. So you don't have any veneer that's loose, you don't have any paint chips that's loose. Make sure that you deal with all of that prior to deciding if you're going to pour epoxy. Now this particular table has some interesting features about it. We've got this curved edge. We also have this edge right here where it's a lip, and it's a really hard 90 degree. So you need to decide how you're gonna approach this table. You can either dam up your top right here at this edge and then pour your top, pour your finish, then come back, pull your tape when your epoxy is at the stage where it's stopped moving and it's no longer gonna drip. Or you can decide to tape your bottom edge. As you pour, you're gonna allow that epoxy to kind of pool up here, thicken up just a little bit, and then pull it and drip. Now, if you do that, you're gonna have to come in here and sand this little lip so that you don't have a hard 90 degrees, because you don't want that little edge to ghost up through your finish. So what we're gonna do in this particular piece is I am gonna sand this so that I have a nice flow over the edge and I don't have my epoxy building up right here and causing surface tension. For ease of pouring this, Kenny built me a cool little Lazy Susan down at the bottom. So now, as I create, I'm gonna be able to turn my table. That's a fun fact. Okay, so now this is where you need to make a decision, and this is where you need to kind of know your furniture before you start. This is all solid wood, so I'm not having to mess with any particle board or veneers or anything like that. So I'm gonna get a nice, pretty smooth edge. If this were particle board, I probably would rethink sanding this down completely, because I would be now dealing with a subpar material and I would have to do a lot of work to get it ready to pour. If it was particle board, and depending on if it was chipping up really bad, at that point you'd have to run some Bondo. At that point you decide, is this table worth doing? So that's something people need to ask themselves, is the piece that I'm going to pour worthy of having the amount of epoxy and the amount of time that I'm gonna put in it to be valuable? Okay, so this table does have a few little issues as far as being able to sand it really smooth. This table was I don't even know what you call that, pre-rusticked, I guess. There's these little knot holes that looks like it was machined in. So those have to be sanded flat. So I'm hoping I can get through that with just the 220 and I don't have to come back and Bondo the whole thing. So let's see if that'll work. All right, so I really like this. It looks like there's still indentions there, but I cannot feel them if I close my eyes and run my hand over. But I'm good to go here, so that's good. I don't have to do any Bondo. All right, so we'll clean this up really, really well, get rid of all the dust, and then we'll go to our next step, which is to paint it. All right, so I'm gonna give it 2 good coats of paint. In this case, I'm using the Stone Coat undercoat. You can definitely use a latex paint. It's fine, or even a chalk paint. Just make sure you give ample time for that paint to off gas. With the Stone Coat undercoat, we only have to wait about 4 hours. With a latex paint or a chalk paint, you're gonna wanna wait at least 24 to 36 hours. Thin winds, you wanna do thin coats. When you paint, it's better to do more coats than to try to do really thick coats. Thick coats of paint can cause, 1, it to take a lot longer to dry. 2, it could crack as the moisture escapes. All right, so I'll let this dry to maybe 2 hours or so. I'll come back with my second coat and then go to the fun part. All right, so with this particular project, we're gonna do 5 ounces per square foot because we're gonna pour our epoxy over our vase, allow it to run down, and then that extra material is going to roll over and spread out on our table. In theory, that's what we're waiting for. All right, so I'm using the regular Stone Coat material. I'm doing 28 ounces. So that's gonna be 14 ounces of A and 14 ounces of B. If you're using a drill, start off very slow. With this particular product, I'm gonna mix for about 2 minutes. All right, so now I'm gonna divide it out in all of my colors. Okay, let's go. All right, as you can see, our paint has dried and we've taped our edges. We've also taped to protect the rest of the table. We've also spray painted the vase with clear matte spray paint. You want the matte because that matte is going to etch that glass and allow the epoxy to have good adhesion. You can also sand with a high grit sandpaper, and that's gonna do the same thing. It's just much easier to spray. All right, here we go. We're gonna take our colors. Now remember, the last color that we put on is what's gonna stay on the vase. The first colors are what's gonna hit this table and start running out. So here we go, let's see. All right, so start off with some black. And I'm just gonna kind of let this black start to roll over a little bit. I'm gonna take my hand, and just like we do our countertops, if you've done countertops, we're kind of greasing the area so that our epoxy will run down. Epoxy likes to go where epoxy has already been. Now, it's not imperative that you do this, but it does help it quite a bit, especially right there where that epoxy has to kind of roll up underneath. All right, so now that I've got it coated, I'm gonna go ahead and load up some more color. This is where you get to have the fun artistic part of the pour. And then once the vase has kind of quit dripping a little bit, what I'm gonna do is rub my finger under the bottom to make sure that I seal that underneath, and then I'm gonna pick it up and very carefully, kind of gets a little suction on there. There we go. All right, so you wanna try to let that move. We are gonna tilt it here in just a second, but I'm gonna let it organically move just a little bit. All right, here comes the fun part. Now we're gonna tilt. Now, if you're worried about not wanting to tilt a lot, you can use more epoxy per square foot than what I did, and you won't have to worry about tilting your piece like I'm tilting. And because I ran my hands and put that grease coat down, the epoxy is going to run a lot easier. All right, I love this. So I'm gonna let this tape sit on here about, oh, I don't know, maybe a good 45 minutes or so. So it starts to really thicken up. And then when it rolls over, I'll have some nice, pretty edges. All right, so I'm gonna hit it with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, just a tiny bit. I'm just barely putting a mist over the top. Sometimes when you use the isopropyl alcohol, especially later in the pour, you'll get these little divots. All you have to do is when you see a divot, take your finger, tap it, and it'll close that surface tension. All right, guys, so what do you think? I'm gonna pull the tape in about, another 25 minutes, but leave me some comments. Let me know what you like. Maybe should I have added an accent color? I'm thinking Rondaka would have been really good. Should I have not tilted it as much? Let me know what you think. I think actually my very favorite piece is where this white and this black meld, and then when I hit it with the alcohol, I have some beautiful cells. I love this. Now obviously I love the design, but I really like this right here as well. All right, so our tape's been on about 45 minutes. I'll take the tape off, let everything drip over, and then we'll let it go for 24 hours. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll put a flood coat. All right, so once I pull my tape, I just want to kind of make sure that it's going to flow. If I have any surface tension, I'll just kind of come and tap it, make sure it really goes up underneath that edge. Now it's important to know that if you don't use at least 5 ounces per square foot, you're not going to want to tape your edges, because if you don't use that much and you tape, what's going to happen is the epoxy will get thick, but you don't have enough epoxy on the surface to push it over the edges. So make sure if you tape your edges that you have enough product on the surface to push it over the edge once you pull your tape. All right, it's been 24 hours. Our color coat is cured. I've pulled the old plastic away to make sure I didn't have any drips down the piece of my furniture, and I've reapplied my plastic for protection. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna sand the color coat, and then we'll get ready to pour our flood coat, which I'll put a tiny bit of diamond dust, not a lot. I don't want it to overpower this, but I do want just a little bit of bling. And I always get people asking me, it leaves scratches, is that gonna show up? No, when you pour your flood coat, all of those surface scratches go away. All right, so for my edges, you can either take off your sanding disc and do it with just your pad, or what I like to use is a Scotch-Brite pad. This is gonna ensure that I don't burn through my edges, because your edges are quite a bit thinner with epoxy than your surfaces. All right, once you've sanded, clean it with 91% isopropyl alcohol to remove all of the sanding dust. Once you do that, try not to touch the surface with your hands. You'll get oils on there. So we're gonna mix up 3 ounces per square foot of our regular epoxy, add a little diamond dust, and we'll be good to go. All right, so we've prepped our vase the same way. I've sanded my drips around the rim, and we'll get ready for the flood coat. We mixed up 3 ounces per square foot from my Vanna, my help today. Everyone, this is Keith McGinnis with KCDC Designs.
Hey everybody.
He's here for our pro class that's going to start on Wednesday. Where can they find you, Keith?
They can find me at kcdcdesigns.com. You can find me on YouTube at KCDC Designs. You can find me on Facebook.
All the above. All right, so we've got about 20 ounces of the regular epoxy. We're gonna do our vase first, and then just whatever's left over, we'll pour it on here. So, like I said, we prepped it the same way. I'm just gonna pour a little bit on here, and just like we did the color coat, I'm gonna just put a skim coat on there so that it rolls over nice. All right, so once we get a nice, good seal coat, now we're gonna come back and just kind of let that do its thing. All right, we'll come back and check on that in just a minute. I am gonna torch it just a little bit. Get it to flow a little easier. Now we did add that diamond dust and you can sure see it kind of giving that a little bit of a sparkle. Make sure you take your finger and you push that epoxy up underneath the rim so you get a good seal. All right, so we'll take the rest and we'll put it on the surface. Pro tip, once you finish with your bucket, turn it upside down, leave it for a couple of days, and you'll be able to pull that right out. As you guys know, if you've watched my videos, I don't use a trowel very often, especially if it's a small piece like this. I just use my hand. I get it all over the surface first before I start pushing it over the edge. Wow, that flood coat really makes this piece pop. Now I get asked often as well, is it necessary to do a flood coat? And my answer is 90% of the time, yes. The reason I say yes is the flood coat is going to be one more layer of protection for your piece. When you add colorants, mica powders, or spray paint, or whatever else to your color coat, you're actually compromising the integrity of that epoxy. You're lowering its heat resistance, you're lowering its scratch resistance. It's definitely not gonna have the same protection as far as food safety as just the plain epoxy as it was intended. So by putting a flood coat, you're bringing all of those characteristics back up to the level of expectation of the epoxy. Also, because we're going to put the ultimate top coat on this piece, this flood coat is going to be a barrier between my ultimate top coat and my color coat. So if something happens and I have to sand down my ultimate top coat, or later down the years it gets a really deep scratch and we have to sand it, that 1/8 inch of flood coat is going to prevent me from sanding and burning down into my color coat. All right, we're gonna torch. I like to torch 3 times, waiting 2 to 5 minutes in between torching. All right, so we're good. We're gonna let this sit for 24 hours. I'm going to turn all air movement off in the room, and I'm also going to turn the light off. The reason we turn the light off is we don't want any little critters to see the reflection of the light and dive bomb and be a Jurassic Park in our top. We will see you in 24 hours. All right, so we've started prepping the table and I've actually painted a little bit of the base, but when we pulled the tape last night, I thought it had quit dripping, but it didn't, which is no big deal. We got a little drip on the wood, which I have to sand this anyway in order to get ready to paint it. So I'm just taking some 220 and I'm just gonna come over here and sand that down. So guys, when you get ready to paint your furniture, especially if you don't know what kind of finish or sealer is on there, it's really important that you prep correctly. Because just like with the epoxy, if your very first layer fails, the rest of your finish is gonna fail. I'm taking a Scotch-Brite, and the reason I'm using Scotch-Brite as opposed to a sanding disc, which you can absolutely use, is because I've got a lot of detail in here, and this is just easier for me to get up and around the corners. But I just wanna rough it up. Now, because I'm doing a white finish, if I had any worry that there was some sort of a finish on here or a top coat or a sealer, or even if the wood was like an old cherry wood and I was worried about bleed through of my tannins, I would come in here and put a stain blocking primer. Just make sure whatever primer that you use, it's a stain blocking primer so that those tannins or any kind of chemical that may be on the piece of furniture won't bleed through. All right, so painting furniture. There are so many paints on the market that you can use. Today, what I'm using is one of my very favorite paints. I love Dixie Belle paint. It is a mineral-based paint, but it does have some acrylic in it, so the bond is amazing. You can go over just about any substrate and it's going to adhere. So I really, really like this. This is actually called Fluff. It's kind of an off-white color. I didn't want to go with a stark white. And like I said, it is a water-based acrylic paint. So I can manipulate with water if I want to thin it down. And you'll see we'll do some blending here in just a minute. Usually a 2-coat coverage. Your first coat you want to be light, just trying to get a coat of paint on there. Never really want to do paint thick. As far as brushes go, you can really get yourself into some expense with brushes. This is a specialty brush. It's called a cling-on brush. I really like it. It's good for any type of a chalk type paint or mineral-based paint. It gives a really pretty finish. Since I was a faux finisher for years, I do have an array of brushes. Now, while I'm letting that dry, I'm gonna come and address the bottom. I painted the bottom last night, and now what I'm gonna do is come back and do some shading. So that's always a lot of fun. So what I'm gonna do now is this is actually dry. All right, so I like that there's some little imperfections because I love texture. So I don't want to sand this smooth. Now, if I wanted an uber smooth finish, then I would hit this very lightly with a Scotch-Brite or say a 320. But I want there to be some texture in this, so I'm gonna leave all those little imperfections. All right, so I'm gonna come in. This is just water, and it's in a very fine mister. And like I said, this paint is dry. Now, if you were doing this at the same time you were painting it, it would be fine because you would already have your paint a little bit wet. So I'm just gonna kind of reactivate this paint. Now I'm gonna come back in with a smaller brush, and I'm just gonna kind of go in here where I wanna put some highlights, wherever I have some grooves, and that's up to you if you want a lot of highlights. But I like to do it anywhere the light may catch. And then I'm gonna come back with the dry brush. And with that dry brush, I'm just gonna kind of blend this in. Now anywhere where there's a hard line, I can come back with my wet brush and I can soften it out. But what that dry brush does is just kind of blend it without adding any more color to it. And you're just gonna kind of play with it until you get it where you want it. So if this is your first time to tackle painting, I would say obviously watch lots of videos. Learn how to paint with a dry brush. That's super helpful. Learning how to manipulate your paint when there's not a lot of paint on the brush is a really good pro tip, because you can really add some subtleness. This brush doesn't have much paint at all on there, but as you can see when I'm hitting it, see how it's bringing in some highlights and I can just blend. That's the difference between average painting furniture and really taking that furniture to the next level, is coming in here with a dry brush and creating depth. That's what's super important. You can see I barely have any paint, but some of that paint is coming off just a little bit, and it's just giving me some highlights. And that's exactly what I'm going for. Let me know in the comments, would you guys like me to show more faux finishing type videos? Is that something you guys would be interested in doing, or even maybe do a private online course on faux finishing? I used to do a lot of those. So let me know if you'd be interested in taking one of those classes. You almost kind of think, where would that piece of furniture have natural wear and tear, or natural shadowing, or even where would it get dirty? A lot of times we try to create a piece that looks like it's worn and old, or we try to create that with the paint. So you kind of think to yourself, where would the light hit it just right to make it have that look? If you guys aren't members of my private insiders group. I would love to invite you to join. It's a great group of people, great group of beginners, all the way to professionals. Lots of very knowledgeable people in that group. Great place to ask questions, great place to get inspired. So just look on Facebook under RK3 Designs Epoxy Insiders. So I can leave my table with no top coat. This is not gonna be a high traffic table like a countertop or a dining room table would be, so I'm not so much worried about a lot of scratches, even though the epoxy itself is very scratch resistant. Let me know, would you leave it a super high gloss, or would you come in and make maybe a matte finish? So I don't feel like buying more hardware, so I'm just gonna kind of upcycle what I have with a little bit of hammered spray paint. We'll go lightly over. You don't want to put a lot because you don't want to have that drip. All right, we'll let that dry. So as soon as this dries, I'm gonna hit it with a dry brush, give it a little bit of an accent, and we'll be good to go. Now, we'll do that, and then we'll come back and we'll wipe it off very lightly. Kind of gives that rustic look. Final touch is hit it with a little bit of clear spray paint to seal the white paint. Have myself a brand new drawer pull. All right, guys, we've cussed and discussed, flipped a coin, and we're gonna do a matte finish to tie this whole table in. Now I have a whole video, very detailed, to show you guys how to apply the ultimate top coat, and we will link that in the description below. All right, so we're gonna apply the matte ultimate top coat, and my trusty sidekick over here, Keith, is gonna do that for me. So, Keith, take it away. All right, we'll let this dry. We'll be able to touch it in about 4 to 6 hours. Touch it very lightly, but we'll be able to use this table in about 2 days. All right, guys, it's been a couple of days. The top coat's dry, the paint's dry, everything looks amazing. I'm so thrilled with the way this little project turned out. Remember, we paid maybe $2 for this at Goodwill. This piece was sitting in my storage for over 10 years collecting dust, and now we've given them a new outlook on life. What do you think? How much do you think this would be worth if you were to pay for it in maybe a boutique or a specialty store? Let me know in the comments below. All right, guys, are your juices flowing? How many of you have pieces stuck in your storage that you're gonna go do something with? Check out our website, rk3designs.com, for all of your epoxy supplies. And remember, don't be scared, move forward, and be creative.